so much. Not to mix the titles. So it's a great pleasure to have a prestigious guest today to discuss European defense and EU-NATO relations. Of course, it's a very difficult time. We are living in very dangerous, unpredictable times, where things that we thought were out of the table, for example, the possibility of a nuclear war is still on the table, and it's the higher risk in this time. So Europe is surrounded by two major wars, the aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine and the crisis in the Middle East, where Israel is fighting a war in Gaza against Hamas, is pressing the Palestinians on the front of humanitarian aid in a very atrocious way, I may say, and has also attacked Iran 6 days ago. So there are many elements, I think, that will come in our discussion. I will first give the floor to Ino Afendouli, who is the Executive Director of IDIS, for her welcome.
Many thanks, dear Marilena, and many thanks to the participants of this panel, Ambassador Oer, Ambassador Schwarzer, and Sam Law, for your presence here today. This event was planned to take place ahead of the NATO summit to discuss the challenges for European security. And certainly when we plan it in cooperation with NATO and Hans Seidel Stiftung, and I would like to thank enormously Jenny Capello for her support, we could not have imagined what will be happening these days. It's an unprecedented situation. I think we are going to listen to you representing three big European countries. So it's important for us, for our guests here today, to listen from France, UK, Germany, what three key European countries think about the evolving situation. And if you allow me, Marilena, a comment, on the situation, because I was writing my column for Tanea this morning, and I stressed that what we are not watching is that the countries that abide by international law are less and less powerful and in a position to impose the rule of law in international affairs. So this is a very radical shift from what happened in the previous decades. So this is an unprecedented situation that it can turn out very badly before a new order is established. So I am glad that you are here to discuss these challenges. Thank you very much again. I also have to apologize for Dimitri Keridis. He will be late because, there is a discussion at the Parliament on, the proposal for the Tempe problem issue, and this is very critical for the parties. So I'm afraid he will be late, but he will be welcome when he comes to join the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ino. So we may start. I would propose that each speaker has a first intervention, and then we can continue with some questions for each one. So I give the floor to, first of all, to Ambassador of France to the Hellenic Republic, Laurence Auer, for her first statement. Please, Madam.
Thank you so much, Marilena. It's a great pleasure to be back here with Ino and Edis. And thank you to the whole assembly to be with us. I'm not going to actually to resolve all the current war situations, but at least sometimes it's good to stop before two European summits and NATO summit, to take a little bit of a background, looking at what we want, what we aim at, especially between France and Greece, Germany and the UK. As you know, with the UK, we are chairing a group of countries that are willing to help Ukraine. And it's very striking to see that when French President Macron starts his press conference after the G7, he speaks about Ukraine. So our determination is complete. Our wish, and I will come back to that, what we can do today, and the current situation between Gaza, Israel and Gaza, the negotiation starting, the Iran new situation that started on Friday, didn't change our coalition of the willing. The second point is the European NATO approximation. I'm speaking of approximation, but I'm not sure we can still use this word. As you know, the EU constantly worked with this new commission since the February 1st rearm project to cope with the very big demands of the US constantly. It was not only Biden, it was before the administration of Biden. It was Trump administration who asked the Europeans to take more part of the European defense and independence. And I think probably it's a run against the clock, but you have to realize that in a record timing, the EU adopted one first regulation, which is called SAFE. It's taking loans to be able to put on the table entries of projects which will be funded by loans. And we will be able as well, I hope, to finish before the European Council the other regulation, which is called EDIP. And it's about, so the first one is called SAFE, which means Security Action for Europe. The second is called EDIP, European Defense Industry Program. And I need to insist on those two very quick steps that we took with the Germans, because this is the newcomer, new chancellor took a new position on the European rearm project, but it's also very noticeable to stress, because sometimes the Greek press have said, oh, you will not block Turkey entering into the SAFE project. No, it's not true. You have unanimity in this first regulation to decide who will enter. We constantly, between France, Germany, and of course, Greece, insisted that in the SAFE projects that are due to be presented to the European Commission from July 2025, so quick, you have a majority European contact. So it's European preference, as we always advocated, but also there is no capacity to any country to enter any European project before you have an agreement with the EU as such. The one we had, for instance, with the UK, the one we have with Ukraine, is a precondition to enter EU funding. So there is a long, long way to go before we have any risk. I'm speaking of risk because even my president said that. It was in Nice, it was in front of Prime Minister Mitsotakis. He stressed any country challenging territorial borders of its neighbor, we reaffirm that we will stick with our partners. And he mentioned Greece and Cyprus. So whatever the press is mentioning, you have to understand that the first regulation is being approved and the second is today in front of Coreper. That is for the long run. We heard what the Americans were asking us at the EU level. We have a plan, 5th of February, called REARM. We started negotiating and we have the first regulation being approved. And thanks God, we have Germany, France together. And thanks God, on the other aspect, being able to have entries of industry together, we are clear on the criteria. You should have a security and strategic agreement with that third country. It can be today Ukraine, it can be UK, could be Canada if we finish the story. I'm not going to elaborate more about Canada being chairing of the G7 because as you know, it was a big crisis at stake, and the objective was at least to have one statement about what was happening in Israel and Iran. And again, whatever you read in the press, the paper is here. We have a statement. It's not perfect. It speaks about regional stability and protection of the civilians. It reaffirms with the US that the Iranian crisis has not to be leading to a broad escalation of hostilities in the Middle East. We reaffirm that we need a ceasefire in Gaza. We say that we want energy markets to stand steady and ready to coordinate. We want market stability, and we reiterate our support to the security of Israel. We say, but that's very French. You read the communique, the reverse one. It was first security of Israel, and the end of the day, ceasefire. This is unfair, etc. What I want to say is that we are preparing the NATO summit with great determination to be sure that what the US asks us, increasing our defense part of the GDP is secured. We made, I cannot say we made the deal was there because I'm not going to enter into the brain of President Trump, but the fact is that I've been 20 years in European and NATO summits, and it's the first time that 1 week before the summit, I can tell you it's a big uncertainty. It is uncertainty because we don't know what will be really the position of our American partners. That the crisis, as you said, Marilena, and as well, you know, are actually blurring our the way we were preparing those summits, and as well that because in this very strange period of transatlantic values to be reaffirmed, we need actually to be sure about what we can do at the United Nations as well, Security Council, where Greece and France are chairing. Uncertainty as well is not only about what we can do together with the sanctions for Ukraine. We are so determined that we can adopt the 18th package of sanctions, implementing as well the peace facility for Ukraine at the European level. This I'm sure it will happen, and the discussion is not blurred by what happens elsewhere. But what is uncertain, in my view, is the way today United Nations is working. You know, the Nice summit was prepared without the United Nations. We said it was 92% of the stakeholders of the protection of the oceans. So fair enough. But what if we suddenly have a partner who comes with measures which are in contradiction with the international rules, or what? In our view, the Nice summit was a good example for the international community to be reassessing that our international system was valid and that we could adopt rules. So it was one treaty, BBNG on high seas. It was protection of the. I'm not going to elaborate more as an introduction to this panel, but what I want to say is that we had everybody around the table, even China, we had everybody. And it was a large and a broad range of questions. It was about fisheries, protected area was a tiny bit of it. It was about connectivity, and it was a lot about the global system to protect something which we have in common, which are the oceans. So maybe I'm too near from the French view that is idealizing the international system to give an assessment of the Nice system or of the European system. But still, I believe that in this period of very big crisis, and I should say war in between Iran and Israel, we still have the rules to run together with a great majority of countries, the international law to be adapted, but also making progress. And within NATO and the EU, we have the same feeling. Well, at this stage, this is my positive answer to open the panel. Afterwards, we can demolish everything.
Thank you very much. So our second speaker is Mrs. Charlotte Zwarcher, Chargée d'Affaires of the Embassy of Germany to the Hellenic Republic. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start by saying the end of history is no more. And that translates into the insecurity that was mentioned by Ambassador Auer. It is exactly, events are so uncertain, our situation is so uncertain that every morning when you switch on the radio, you cannot believe that again something has happened that is mind-boggling, and you wonder, how are we going to deal with it? But two things. The UN continues to be a point of reference, and rules and regulations created by the United Nations still are a basis of communication, even if many people believe that the rules no longer are respected as they should be. But it is still a very important point of reference, and I believe that our Greek colleagues are witness to that with their everyday work in the Security Council. And it is also a time where a rules-based organization such as the EU is actually rising to the occasion. Realizing that with a huge number, with a numerous population, and also as an economic powerhouse, it actually also simply is in a position of power if it gets itself organized, and that is exactly what is happening right now. The EU has lived up to the occasion with regard to Ukraine. It is living up to the occasion with enhanced security and defense industry, which has turned out to be very important, and not only because our American NATO partner is asking for it, but simply because there is a recognition that the world isn't as safe as it was considered to be 25 years ago. And obviously, every single member state cannot stand alone, but working together, they will manage. And insofar, you can see that the European Union is stepping in. And obviously, the member states, France, Germany, have been standing together with many of the statements and with many of the initiatives taken. For Germany, it is important to remain a reliable partner, and I believe that Chancellor Merz and his team have proven that in this very short period of time they've actually been in the government. And so when you look at Ukraine, which no longer is in the headlines today, because we are all looking at what is happening in Iran and in the Near East, we are not forgetting that the 18th sanctions package is in the process of being prepared, and people are optimistic that this will be passed very soon, even though not everything is decided. The 17th package was worked on and decided quickly, and the 18th already was being considered. Ukraine has several security arrangements with various member states, which are the basis of the collaboration. And the goal to keep the United States involved in Ukraine is being obtained with close negotiations, and we feel that the US continues to be an important partner in everything that is happening right now. The fact that there has been a G7 leader statement now on Israel and Iran is a sign that proves that things are possible. When it comes to it is a statement of optimism. I do believe that Europe standing together can actually deal with a lot, and that it will be, and while it is important to keep the United States on our side, we will prove to be strong enough to actually deal with the challenges ahead. I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much. So now it's the turn of Captain Sam Law from the Royal Navy, United Kingdom, Defense Attaché to the Hellenic Republic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyria Koppa. I have to say, I feel a little bit like an imposter being on a panel with such esteemed diplomats. However, as a simple sailor, I will try and give you the UK position. When Kyria Fantuli invited the UK to speak on this panel some weeks ago, as was pointed out, the situation was slightly different to what we see today. And I think it's important just to state the UK position on what's happening between Israel and Iran. As has been stated in the press, there was no UK military participation in Israeli strikes. But more broadly, we've always supported Israel's right to self-defense and its right to protect its citizens. Along and aligned fully with the G7 statement, which reflects the UK position perfectly, there is real concern about Iran's nuclear ambitions. And the message really from the Prime Minister, from Sir Keir Starmer, is that it's all about de-escalation where possible. It's a dangerous moment for the region, and we need to see some restraint. So turning more to the kind of topic of today's panel, I'll speak a bit about the UK, NATO, and the EU. So I think it's a truism to say that we face a generational, imminent, and pressing threat from Russia. That's a Russia that is emboldened by its enablers. We see that threat on our doorstep in Ukraine, but also in our own societies. The full-scale war in Ukraine has now entered its 4th year, and Russian forces are showing no sign of holding back. But they don't have what we have. We have the strongest alliance in history, half of the world's economy and military might, 2 continents, 32 nations, and over 1 billion people. We have the commitment of the United Kingdom's independent nuclear deterrent and almost all of the UK armed forces. Across Europe, 500,000 troops at high readiness, ready to defend every inch of Allied territory. Razor-sharp regional defence plans, and these have been tested in high-octane exercises, including Neptune Strike, which saw the United Kingdom's carrier strike group sail for the first time under NATO command. Or, as seen here in Greece, this year's exercise Steadfast Dart, which saw over 1,000 British troops, 400 vehicles deployed to southern Europe. This exercise would not have been possible without significant support from the Hellenic government and the armed forces, who have invested in and are prioritising the port of Alexandroupoli as a key regional logistics node. So together we are steadfast in our support for Ukraine, because we know that Ukraine's security is our security. And we're learning from Ukraine that we must do things differently in order to outsmart our adversaries. That's why innovation is at the heart of the generational shift in NATO's warfighting readiness, binding in the best of every sector of our societies. So in the UK, we believe NATO is strong because of its transatlantic bond at its core. However, we're rapidly making the alliance fairer and more European. In London and Lisbon, Ottawa and Oslo, allies are investing billions of extra dollars in defence, agreeing a new defence spending pledge to meet the threats of a more dangerous world. And here in Greece, we have a government which recognises the importance of NATO, with defence spending as a percentage of GDP consistently exceeding the NATO target. There's no doubt that Europe is stepping up to the plate, backing a rapid generational shift in how we defend and deter every inch of allied territory. But this shift is commensurate to the threats we face today on our continent. So we're building on the strengthened UK-European Union relationship and leveraging our combined industrial might to create jobs and economic growth, producing the capabilities we need to keep the alliance safe. The net result is security for all of NATO's 1 billion citizens. I'd like to focus for a moment on the EU. It's absolutely clear to the UK that all EU nations are playing a key role in Europe, stepping up for its own defence. But we also believe that this must be driven by NATO's capability requirements. We must work together to ensure our efforts are interoperable, coherent, and work for all allies. So as mentioned by Ambassador Aya, on the 19th of May this year, the UK and the EU agreed an ambitious new security and defence partnership. The partnership is broad and innovative and will upgrade our cooperation on areas ranging from defence industry, mobility of military material and personnel, maritime security, and space security. It also covers illicit finance, irregular migration, and working together to protect critical infrastructure. We've also agreed to enhance our cooperation on health security, to protect against emerging health threats, and also to grow our relationship on development and humanitarian issues. We in the UK need the EU member states' continued support as we begin to implement this security and defence partnership, and we take it into practical collaboration, including on the Security Action for Europe, known as SAFE, as mentioned by Ambassador Aya. We really welcome the adoption of this SAFE instrument, and we look forward to embracing the mechanism as a catalyst to create opportunities for collaboration and investment across Europe, and hopefully lead to a more strengthened, resilient, and competitive European defence industrial base. Why, though? Why do we need such a strong industrial base? Well, the nature of the threat that we're all facing is changing, and we urgently need to develop a more sophisticated response. That's something which NATO is doing day by day. While Putin's tanks grind to a halt in the face of Ukrainian innovation and Western resolve, we are seeing him and his enablers using a medley of hybrid tactics to try and destabilize NATO. Together, we will expose and counter these desperate measures each year. As an example, the Royal Navy secretly monitored every move made by the Yantar, which is a spy ship that Russia sailed up through the English Channel. UK works hand in hand with NATO allies to foil sabotage, protect our critical undersea infrastructure, and to boost our cyber defences. This is the calling of a modern defensive alliance, and we're ready to meet the moment. That's why it's right that NATO's new defence spending plan should include investment beyond traditional defence capabilities. As our Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said, we need to be ready to meet a murky era of sabotage and subterfuge. So how, in concrete terms, is the UK going to contribute? What are we going to do? Well, we recognise that defence is an engine for growth and for skills. It supports Britain's economy. It contributes to the growth essential for our economic security and our prosperity. That's why, as announced in February of this year and confirmed in the Strategic Defence Review, which was published only a few weeks ago, we intend to increase defence spending up to 2.6% of GDP by 2027, and then 3% in the next parliamentary session after that. What does that mean in real terms? Well, between 2023 to 2028-29, that's a real term increase of £10.9 billion. Defence investment will benefit the whole economy, and innovation in technology will kickstart developments in other sectors. We know that the security provided by a strong defence is a key foundation in setting the conditions for economic growth and improving wealth for all. So coming specifically to the Hague Summit, I think we all have a role to play in securing a good outcome on defence spending. We in the UK fully recognise the need for an increased defence investment pledge. We're broadly comfortable with a 5% headline figure, but significant increases up to that level will not be easy for the UK, nor will it be easy for our allies. We should put ourselves in a position where we have a defence investment pledge that is not just ambitious, but credible. Therefore, we believe that it will be beneficial to explore potentially longer timelines over a decade to 2035. Perhaps we could also consider a review clause at some point in this timeline that will allow us to tie in the next round of capability targets and reassess our collective progress. A longer-term approach will also allow industry to keep pace, to deliver major procurement projects and capabilities, and it will also prevent the driving up of prices. This way, we can harness innovation, we can exploit new technologies, and we can ensure that we will get the most for our taxpayers' money. So in sum, we're confident that the decisions that are made in The Hague will ensure a stronger, fairer, and revitalized NATO. This is an alliance that has every tool it needs to deter and defend in order to keep over 1 billion people safe to prosper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have the initial statements of our speakers. What I propose is for me to address one question to each of the speakers and then to open up for the audience, if you agree. So let me start with Ambassador Auer. What, in your view, what sort of initiatives could EU and NATO take in order to end the two wars? Because for the moment, what we see, it's in the Ukraine front, the EU has become a sort of irrelevant, and it doesn't take a very firm position as a negotiator in the Middle East crisis. So what's your view?
So it's very important here to assess what is NATO. NATO is not a collective defense organization, it's an alliance. And as you remember, in 2022, there was this big discussion about, can we ask Ukraine to join NATO? And NATO cannot make new candidatures because it would be a state of war with Russia. So first of all, NATO today has the EU pillar and the European pillar, I would say, because what the British colleague said is very true for Europe as a whole. We got the message from the US that the EU pillar and the European pillar of NATO should be strengthened. And we are running out of time to actually, before the summit, to show that concretely. So the discussion our dear colleague mentioned about the 5% is the currently discussions they have under NATO. The 5% is on the table. We don't know the schedule, but the idea would be not to change the structure of NATO, not to decide that we can have a strategy toward any type of Middle East or Iran or whatever process which are taking place. It's for ourselves to defend our own territory. And the territory is not going to be enlarged. Otherwise, it's a casus belli with Russia. So it's very important to reaffirm that. Otherwise, Poland, and the ambassador here can assess, is at stake. Romania is at stake. Each time NATO operational or NATO wants to go outside of NATO territory, it's a casus belli with Russia. Why I have to mention that? It's because in the discussion about conditions of a long-lasting peace in Ukraine, we have to decide collectively who can secure any type of peace agreement. As you know, when President Trump arrived and said, yeah, 24 hours, we'll do it, ceasefire is something, but the long-lasting conditions of peace has to be invented by the international community. It cannot be NATO at no condition. So you will ask me, but why are we competing to reach this 5% capacity altogether? Because this is the wake-up call that we had from the Americans. So now I must say that today we have 23 of the 32 allies spending at least 2% of the GDP, and the next NATO summit will be about that. Can they reach 5%? How we would do it? For France, as you know, we doubled our military programming since 2017. And to refer to the Greek debate, when SAFE was approved, the question was, and I made several phone calls, is France going to be going for SAFE, new laws? You have your debt already completely cracking the French budget, and for the Greek minister then, yes, it was the question, will you go for SAFE or will you not? And basically France and Greece had the same reasoning. We created an instrument, and we should use this instrument. It's not normal debt. It's something we have to build, which is new together. About your question, this is for NATO summit and this is for Ukraine. I must say as well that for Ukraine, we have another priority, is to fill up the gap that the American armament, which are no longer coming to Ukraine, has to be filled. It's not a NATO discussion as well. It cannot be there. We have to do under this coalition of the willing, the pressure is very strong because every loophole will be used by Russia. And if it's not in Ukraine, it can be on one of the Baltic states. So now we also have the command of NATO, because if you remember what I explained, NATO is a collective defense alliance. But in case the breach of one of the frontiers would be done on a NATO country, there we would have to react. Finally, I have to speak about Iran. Iran, as you know, was dealt not by Brussels, NATO, not by any United Nations. It was completely taken into a specific track of negotiations. E3, we are all there. France, Germany, UK. The E3 negotiations in Vienna completely collapsed 10 days ago. So that's why you would say, but why France said that we are supporting Israel? We are supporting Israel because the Iranians, they broke up all what they have promised in Vienna. It's again a completely ununderstandable for us situation. And what we ask today collectively is that they go back to the negotiation table in Vienna, please, not in anywhere else, not in Washington, not anywhere. They have to go there because they have committed themselves for a long time not to have the nuclear weapon. And they have to stick to that. Otherwise, there is no possible confidence in anything. It doesn't mean for France that a change of regime is possible like that. We all know because of the Iraq story, we know about Afghanistan, that change of regime by the weapons never work. So it's a lot of interferences and a lot of chaos, but sorry about that. This is my answer about NATO. What can NATO do? Not this. What can NATO not do in Gaza? Not this as well.
Thank you very much. So my question goes to Mrs. Warcher. Chancellor Merz declared that Israel is doing the dirty job of the West. So do you think that the situation is more stable after the hits and against Iran? Do, as an international community, accept the preemptive strikes as a notion? and especially not only as international community, but also as as European Union? Thank you.
I might start with the discussion we had at Canada Day last night. And it was very interesting to hear how absolutely convinced some of us are that the Israeli strike violates public international law. I heard it on German radio that professors believe that that is the case because, and the reason being that there is no imminent strike, there was no imminent strike to be expected, and therefore preemptive strikes could not be taken into account. And I would like to, and then there was a group of us who said, well, when you're talking nuclear weapons, how long do you have to wait? Does the weapon have to be finished somewhere in an arsenal ready to be triggered at some point, or is it enough that do you need, well, how much of 90% enriched do you need, or is it sufficient that you have 60%, which also maybe could be used for maybe a less effective but still dirty bomb? What is the situation when it comes to nuclear? And this is actually what I heard Norbert Röttgen say, the foreign policy MP in Parliament, in the Bundestag, and he basically said, how long do you have to wait, and especially if you're not sure about your intelligence, etc., etc. So without actually going into the details, do I believe this was right or wrong on a public international law? We are dealing with a different animal here, and with a country who not only in violation of the NPT, all promises made ever since it became a party to that treaty by simply continuing on to enrich uranium over time, having reached an amount and enrichment grade that is not necessary for any kind of civil use, plus a clear determination and let's say state goal to eliminate a country, to eliminate the existence of Israel, that amounts to a certain threat that might be or should be taken into consideration. The G7 leaders' statement actually uses the wording, Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror. Chancellor Merz, in an interview, went on, said, was a state of terror. And when he when he said Israel is doing the dirty work, and he was how did he phrase it then, and that he admired the guts the Israelis had. This is what he said in this interview. Die Welt wrote, Merz is back, because he is known to make rather ruffian statements sometimes. But the sentiment is, in this particular case, under these particular circumstances, how long does a country that has been on the abolishment list of another have to wait until it's considered an imminent attack? That would be my comment.
And my final question before we open the floor. So you all agree that the G7 statement on Middle East was something very positive concerning that there was a common ground. But in fact, the G7 did not manage to forge and adopt a strategy. So what is the position, and especially of Britain, on the situation, on preemptive strikes, on humanitarian situation in Gaza? And I would like the UK position. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I think my colleague from the German embassy made it very clear that before those strikes, it had become really clear that Iran's nuclear program was at the most advanced stage it had ever been, and that was posing a direct threat to international peace and security. So while we didn't participate in the strikes, I think, as I said, or indeed support them through military means or any other means, I think it's important to state that we do very much support Israel's right to self-defense, and that in this instance, they took action, as my German colleague said. How long should Israel have waited before taking action? At what point do you decide, enough's enough, and we need to do something about this? After the years and years of clear signaling from Iran that they wish to destroy the state of Israel, I think they clearly felt action needed to be taken. In terms of a strategy, and I think the timing of the G7 summit against the timing of those strikes, I think it would be impossible to come up with a strategy because the situation is still evolving. I think we will have to see how this plays out in the coming days. Clearly, there will be a large element of it will depend upon what the United States decides to do, as they globally hold the kind of balance of military power. But I think to try and come up with some kind of coherent strategy to tackle the situation at that point would probably have been unrealistic.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Sorry about that, because in terms of timing, it was also very striking to see that Israel was supposed to participate this week, today, in New York, to a meeting with the two states. The recognition asked by France and Saudi Arabia, it was a format that we have prepared for the last 6 months. And of course, the meeting was cancelled. But so in terms of timing, it was, of course, the failure of the Vienna discussions and the very provocative statements of Iran that provoked Israel to do so. But it was also a momentum which happens to be the moment where they were supposed to respond to the request of several Arab states to go to New York on the recognition of the state of Palestine, just to mention.
Thank you very much. So now I think we are ready to take questions. Mrs. Gabunelli, Executive Director of Eliam.
Let me just follow up on the argument. As the resident international lawyer, I'm the one who's actually doing international law in the room, I think. And yes, it is true that the established knowledge up to now was that we are not supposed to use anticipatory self-defense. In other words, we would expect to see an attack in some state, at least at the beginning, before we respond with a defensive action. It is also true that in 3 different occasions, Israel has actually acted against a nuclear weapons or the use of nuclear power. The first time was in Iraq. You remember almost 30 years ago. On that occasion, what happened was that even the Security Council condemned that action, which means that the US did not veto the whole case. The argument of Israel at the time was exactly that they could not afford waiting for the nuclear plants to become operational, because at that point, the prohibition under humanitarian law would actually kick in. The second time was in Syria, no action by the Security Council, which was blocked. And the third time was now. Would that mean that we have moved away from the blanket prohibition? I wouldn't be ready to do that as a lawyer. However, I would be very willing to discuss the possibility of a new law, a new norm emerging that refers only to nuclear weapons, the possibility, therefore, of their use, and after some kind of a confirmation by the IAEA, which was certainly the case under the present circumstances. I would actually argue that when the International Court of Justice in the advisory opinion on the legality of the use of nuclear weapons said that refused to go for an outright prohibition and actually said there is nothing that would prohibit a state to use all measures necessary to defend itself, I would turn it around and say nothing prohibits a state from actually defending itself against nuclear weapons if there is such a credible threat at the end of the day. And I would have no problem whatsoever to find that there is a credible threat here, that all warranties are in place, and I would be among those who would be happy to consider such an exception, very limited exception, very specific circumstances, certainly not a blanket exception. Otherwise, we're going to end up another kind of zoo altogether, and we're already in a very difficult environment. So I'll stop here and I'll come back later perhaps with a question that I must ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Another, please. Please identify yourself for the...
First of all, I would like to thank all the panel. So my name is Konstantinos Gouvas, and I'm a PhD candidate in Pantheon University. So my question is the following. Should Turkey, a country that has an ambiguous, to say the least, commitment to democratic values and has invaded many of its neighbors like Cyprus, Syria, Libya, take place in the European defense system of tomorrow? In essence, should Europe sacrifice its core democratic values for short-term geopolitical gains? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we'll take some more questions, if you agree, and then please.
Thank you very much. This question is mostly asked for the dignitaries of NATO and Foreign Ambassador. Alexander Sagiakis, I studied maritime law with an interest in international relations. I would like to ask this one related to Ukraine. Do you believe that without the United States military support due to the Trump administration, showing a more kind-hearted look towards Putin and his allies, do you believe that NATO by themselves can continue to supply and arm the Ukrainian armed forces to be able to continue the war on a defensive structure?
You and the third question. Anyone? Oh, Mr. Tsikas.
Thank you. My name is Theodoros Tsikas. I am political scientist and international relations analyst. I'm also vice president of European Federalists in Greece. The question is concerning our main question about Israel strikes. So it was a preemptive attack or a preventive attack? This is, I think, it has some importance.
Let's start the other way around. Please, Captain.
So on the first question, it's something that I spend a significant amount of my time here in Greece pondering about the role of Turkey in NATO, the role of the UK and their relationship, because the UK clearly has a relationship with Greece and with Turkey. They're both NATO allies. I think that, and this is Sam Law talking, this is not the UK government, but I think that possibly as we see the situation play out further in Israel and Iran, there is a chance that the way Turkey acts in that situation may reveal more about their kind of position on other matters. I The UK's position with Turkey is clear that they are a NATO ally, and therefore we have a strong defence relationship with them. It's clearly a more difficult question here in Greece, and I don't feel for a minute able to pronounce on how I think that particular issue should be resolved. Ukraine without US support, I think, is going to be. It's clear it's going to be difficult. The US has provided a significant amount, but so have other members of the Ambassador, I referenced the coalition of the willing. Greece has done a lot. Greece has done a lot with often quietly, without fanfare, and I think that needs to be recognised. The UK, in terms of what we've provided, we have and continue to provide materiel, so whether that's ammunition, weapon systems, but we've also done a lot with training. We have an operation called Interflex in the UK, which trains Ukrainian personnel and gets them ready for the front line. But also we operate across Europe. There's another operation in Romania called Interchange, which we lead on. And so to answer the question, it's going to be difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think with enough resolve from the other members of that coalition of the willing, I think it is achievable. Preemptive or preventative? So I am a linguist, but I'm not a specialist in semantics. I suspect that, well, I don't suspect, I know that there will be a clear legal definition for those terms, I would imagine. Therefore, I don't think I shall enter that minefield if I can prevent myself from doing so. Thank you.
I might echo my British colleague. Turkey is a NATO partner. And as such has been observed more closely than others, I think, by a lot of us. And still, Turkey is an ally in NATO. And as such also has enjoyed certain privileges when it comes to weapons exports as far as NATO allies are concerned, which weren't as clear for a long time, but I mean, it never was like some state in Latin America that is far away. It's a NATO ally. At the same time, we are looking at Turkey, how it is sort of guiding itself through the situation in the Middle East, how it has been guiding itself with regard to Ukraine. And there is no doubt that Turkey has a large arms production on its own, that in this day and age where all our production facilities actually are stretched to the limits, is very interesting in what we want to do. So without answering the question, this is where thinking is. Can we afford not to see Turkey as an ally and try to keep it close? Second question, preventing. I'll take the same excuse, but I would say it definitely was a strike used to prevent the development of an extremely dangerous situation, and especially the use of an extremely dangerous weapon. And finally, Ukraine, role of Turkey in NATO, Ukraine preventive. Oh, and Ukraine without USA. This is me answering. I am convinced that Europe can. It may not be easy, and there are certain capabilities I have read that, and that is discussed in all kinds of talk shows, that Europe does not yet have. But I am convinced that Ukraine's defense can continue to be formidable with Europe's help.
please.
Three very interesting questions. About Ukraine, US. It was very striking when President Trump was elected to see that there was this kind of small second thoughts in a lot of European heads of states and governments saying, no, don't worry, they will not forget it. They are playing, you know, they are bargaining us, so we invest more in defense, but the US are our umbrella. It's very striking because we almost had a fight at the European Council at some point, you know, between the countries such as Italy, who said, I'm going to talk to President Trump, don't worry, they will not divert from etc. And the others saying, okay, this is new age, be careful, let's invest ourselves, otherwise our security will not be taken on board. I think now there is a majority of countries realizing that this is serious and it's true that we have to tackle our European security by ourselves. Second question about prevention, preemptive action. As France is a nuclear power, as you know, and we always played it very differently when we came to NATO. For instance, you know, the Charles de Gaulle is a nuclear power and has nuclear arms. We are having an exercise under NATO, but we're not using the nuclear power. It's a completely different system. It's deterrence. Nuclear power is not possible. The way the Iranians were doing that, it is not even acceptable. So that's why we are speaking about going through diplomacy. We cannot codify, as you said, Maria, suddenly a use of nuclear weapons or a program that would be directed against a country, etc. It's really the solution of the nuclear program of Iran is about getting a consensus with this country, and the consensus is you don't do it, full stop. Turkey, this is one of our favorite topics here in Greece. SAFE program was adopted on the 3rd of June. Definitely, it's on some issues, you know, Turkey is coming back to us saying, hey, I want internal market immediately. I will join this and this. But you didn't hear Turkey saying, I want to jump on a security agreement with Europe. So this first condition, we didn't hear anything. So they don't want to have a security agreement with Europe. It's not only human rights, what it would mean for Turkey. It is because do they want to have that? On the other side, they are part of NATO. They've been part of NATO for a long time, and it worked. It worked relatively well. And I think it's in our interests when we prepare the NATO summit to consider that we have to do with Turkey and the NATO chapeau, and they are having this dialogue even today at the foreign affairs level, and that we have to consider them as loyal members of NATO. Again, what is NATO? This is the point, you know, it's not an alliance to answer any type of war in the Middle East. So does Turkey has a concrete added value in those periods? I don't see any signal from Turkey at this stage under the NATO preparation of the summit. And be careful, I must tell you, otherwise it falls on my head immediately. So I am very careful that we don't reopen the planning discussion we had in 23 about the maps. You know, in the forward plan of NATO, you have a scheme with maps, and it was a very tough discussion. So obviously I'm very careful about that. In case I come back to discuss about it, it's here.
Could I just reinforce something that Ambassador Ara said, and it's about the SAFE thing, and I can say this as a someone from the United Kingdom about non-EU third-party countries accessing that. It's absolutely clear in that safe regulation that it can only be done through a prior security and defence agreement with the EU. And that's why the UK was so keen to get in there quickly and do that, because it's something we believe in and something we believe we'd like to take part in. But as Ambassador Ağar says, Turkey has shown absolutely no desire to do that. And it's clear that they won't be able to access SAFE and certainly not EDIP. That's without further discussion, negotiation, and having to sign an agreement. And that would have to be ratified by the European Council.
Very much. Please. A little bit louder, please. Thank you, Mrs. Kakipali. Yes. You, yes, you have already asked, so if we have time at the end, please.
Stavros Peridis, just returned from a master's program in the United States. I have two brief questions. The first is for the representatives. If you feel that there is a coherent US strategy
can take one more. Okay, let him ask again. No third question, huh? Finished.
Yeah, very interesting questions. So Turkey, again, I think I have to advocate a little bit, not Turkey, but NATO, to explain how it works. You know, I remember first time we met, I think we spoke about it at some point, but when Davoli, the new commander-in-chief of NATO is no longer American, he's coming from Baltic Sea, I don't remember if it's Latvia or Lithuania. Is he Italian with this name? Okay, so he's Italian, but he used to say, Davoli, in NATO, you come as you are. So you just arrive with your, so we don't ask Turkey to go through the screenings or whatever, the values or whatever the strategic plans of how we do in the EU. NATO, you're just part of a defensive islands of your territory. So I hope it answered the whole question about what Turkey is doing with NATO, etc. It doesn't mean that, for instance, you are obliged to have NATO as a partner when you do an exercise. It's really when you want. You go, just go. If you don't want, or if the partners in the exercise don't want, you don't go. Now about the two different questions. Who wants 5%? And what is our margins of maneuver of the 5%? Why do we stick to 5%? It is a difficult question, and that's why we are having this big question about 5% in a very far period. It's an objective which we have to, I mean, today we are 2, even if we doubled in France, we are above 2. And as you know, in Greece as well, 2 or 3 maybe. So 3.2. But so the idea is to put an objective, not to do it immediately. And why we are doing so, and who is the enemy? Because it's true that we are not identifying our enemies. We are defending ourselves. So this is what I want to stress. It's very important to convince our citizens that our defense means defending ourselves. So it is true that we had the narrative was completely reversed. For 60 years in the EU, we said to our citizens, we build Europe, common market, free circulation, because we aim at peace and stability. Now we say, hey, guys, we should invest in defense. It's very tough, I agree. It's very tough, but we have to be realistic. If we don't do it, neither the relationship with the US will be better, neither relationship with our neighborhood will be easier. It's not us who are attacking disinformation systems in Europe. It's Russia. It's not us who started. We have to be quite clear about that.
Captain, please.
So I won't spend a long time on Turkey, but just to say that, and to reinforce what Ambassador R said, NATO's role is as a defensive alliance, and I think you have to compartmentalize that in as much as it doesn't necessarily, therefore, it shouldn't, and it doesn't constrict other countries, the members of NATO, from acting in national interest, whether for good or bad. And I'm not here to pass judgment on whether Turkey acting in its national interest is good or bad. Clearly they do. Erdogan, his priority is the national interest there. So I'll just focus, if I may, on the question about how do we convince the general public of the need to increase defense spending. I'll just pause 1 second.
Welcome, Mr.
Welcome.
Please.
So I'll just finish this answer briefly. It's a subject that's really close to my heart as a naval officer, because as you know, the United Kingdom is an island. Yet if you were to go to the streets of Birmingham or Gloucester, you would struggle to find people that understand why we need a Royal Navy. Until you tell them that most of the clothes that they're wearing or the phone that they're using or arrived on our island by sea. We do, I think, in the UK have a clear adversary in Russia because of our proximity to Russia. And therefore, I think it should therefore be easier to convince the general public of the need to spend up to 5%. I don't think it will be easier, because as you rightly pointed out, it will mean cutting elsewhere, whether that's cutting welfare, the National Health Service, or in other areas. I don't hope for. I think there needs to be a wake-up call, certainly for us in the UK, on the importance of spending on defence. The government gets it, and that's why they've announced the increase to 2.6 and then 3 subsequently. But yeah, it's something that needs further work. Very briefly, if I may, on your two questions, is there a coherent coherent US foreign policy strategy at the moment? I am not in a position to give an opinion on that. All I will say is, from a personal perspective, the US administration is is bedding in. They're working out kind of where their positions are on things. And I think if I speak to some of my US colleagues in defense, sometimes their day-to-day positions are not necessarily as clear as mine are. I'll leave it at that. Do we have fiscal space to go to 5% now in the UK? Absolutely not. We could not do 5% now. This will take some time to grow to. And that was why I made the point about possibly negotiating a longer term strategy, and with the opportunity to review that at the relevant points. Thank you.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, 5% are not really on the immediate agenda. It is a number that has been put into a discussion by the American president, and in a situation where military threats coming from Russia, in particular in Europe, is perceived as increasing, the number is no longer as striking as it might have been 2 years ago. So it is a point of discussion, but I know Germany is definitely striving for 3.5 in immediate military spending. And so we will, and that is a big change from where we were a few years ago and where we are now, which is a little over 2%, if I'm not mistaken. And so thereby meeting the goals. What is the discussion in our population? Obviously, in a period where the economy may have some problems, people are wondering whether they really should be diverting money to defense as opposed to as opposed to social welfare, healthcare, I don't know, issues like that. And that discussion is ongoing. But interestingly enough, recent polls have shown that Germany does, or the German population does perceive the threat from Russia and realizes and supports an increase in defense spending, and actually is opening up also to conscription army, even though discussion is at a very at the beginning stage. So yes, I would say it is a discussion that is ongoing, but it is not considered completely outrageous and out of the world. I mean, and also if you look at our colleague just said, well, an increase in government spending on arms actually helps industry. I mean, a lot of people actually work in companies that either produce arms immediately or are the secondary industry that is there. So it actually creates jobs. And the other thing is it also creates infrastructure. You need roads tanks can use, you need bridges that are strong enough to hold tanks. So there are a few issues there. When it comes to a strategy, US strategy for Europe, my answer is I do not know. It seems from what you can read in the media that the vice president is not a fan of Europe. The president himself has said the EU was created in order to hurt the US, which I personally found interesting. But I think this is where my knowledge would end about what the US strategy means. And then the third question was again Turkey. Turkey is a NATO partner. I think none of us mentioned strategic NATO partner, and I'd leave it at that.
So welcome our colleague, our esteemed colleague, Dimitri Keridi. He will give the final comments on, as he was not present during the discussion. But I have one last question. You know, we're discussing preemptive strikes, coalition of the willing. It's a little bit retro. It goes back to 2003. Is Iran the new Iraq? And it's a question for all four of you. Please, who wants to react? If any of you, I don't.
I'll throw something very brief in. So back in 2003, there was a question mark over weapons of mass destruction and what Saddam Hussein had access to, but there was never a nuclear question. And I think that changes the game. And I think that was really strongly voiced by my German colleague. I think that's where this is different, because we're talking about a country that has a clear stated aim to not only develop a nuclear weapon, but in parallel has a clear stated aim to destroy the state of Israel. And that's where we are different here.
The same. We always, under AEA and in Vienna, secured that Iran could never have the weapon. And so the nuclear weapon was constantly one of the objectives of those negotiations. So somehow the Iraqi situation for me is still coming again. But you remember there were all those discussions about evidences, United Nations. So at that time, the international system, the United Nations system was involved. Here you have IAEA, so the very specialized nuclear organization, and no reaction at this stage of the Security Council. I hope for the Greek diplomats that it will continue, otherwise it's very complicated in the United Nations. But on the, as Maria said, but at there is something which remind me of 2003. So I was a spokesperson of President Chirac, and it was US presidency, and we were near Florida in a terrible G7 summit where the journalist, it was suddenly the death of President Reagan, and everything was the fault of France. You know, we blocked any attack. We didn't go to. And at some point, Chirac told us, "Okay, guys, we go back to France." And we said, "President, you cannot go back to France. You are here for another part of the summit. For there were 4 days of discussions." And at the end of the story, we announced Evian, you know, yes, we're going to Evian for the next French presidency of G7. And this week, I had some journalists asking me, "Can you speak about Evian in an interview?" I said, "I already made an interview on Sunday. I'm not going to speak about Evian and the French priorities. The world is in a chaos. So I'm not going to elaborate about the Evian summit." So yes, very tough memory for French diplomats. We were harassed. It was a summit where we appeared as the enemy number one in an organization of the G7. Quite complicated.
I understand that one might have the association, but the cases are very different.
Last but not least, Dimitri Keris.
Well, let me start by saying that some things never change, and that France was and continues to be at the receiving end of the stick, if I were to judge by the recent tweet by President Trump. I guess it's part of an American tradition. Now, I apologize for my delay, inexcusable delay. And the truth of the matter is that had Jenny Capello not sent me an SMS, an urgent SMS, I might not have made it, because we have a very important session in Parliament where I'm speaking. I will be the last speaker on the opening of a criminal investigation against a minister of the government. This is unprecedented. Never before a government majority has referred one of its own to the courts. And I hope this will bring, sincerely hope that this will bring this tragedy to a political closure and allow the justice system to do its work and to allow justice to be done. However, I couldn't miss it, because it's always a pleasure to be back to my old home, Ivis, together with esteemed colleagues that I miss a lot. We have Marilena at the head, moderating, and obviously so many others in the audience I'm not going to mention. And of course, representing 3 very important countries from Europe. And a very important topic, I am the head of the Greek delegation to NATO's Parliamentary Assembly that recently celebrated its 70th anniversary in Dayton, Ohio, together with the 30-year anniversary of the Dayton Accords, of the signing of the Dayton Accords, which we are very familiar with here in Greece, in the Balkans. I will say 4 things about NATO and 1 little thing about the Middle East. I cannot escape the temptation that Marilena offered. The first is that NATO, which was founded, as we all know, in 1949, is a great acquis from the Cold War. And that were we to invent NATO today, probably we wouldn't be able to do so, and certainly pass it through a 2/3 majority in the US Senate. So it's good that it was created then and that we still have it around. However, it needs to be recalibrated, and it needs adaptation to the new age. And it's only natural that with the rise of China, the transatlantic link and relationship will have to adapt to the new era. Now, a lot has been said about Trump and against Trump, especially here in Europe. But the truth of the matter is that we Europeans did not do our part when it came to defense. We spent too little, and nowhere is this more evident in the needs of the German army. I am very happy now to see that Germany is making a great effort to rearm. And Germany is very essential because it's the biggest economy, a $4.5 trillion economy in Europe. And a lot will depend on what it does next. There has been a lot of hypocrisy in NATO about spending. Nowhere is this more evident with the current General Secretary of NATO, Mr. Rutte, who was for many, many years Prime Minister of the Netherlands, a country that barely spends 2% now after some late increases. And Mr. Rutte was essential back in the 2010 to stop not only to stop the Dutch budget from rising, but actually declining, having it decline. Nevertheless, now as the General Secretary of NATO, he's all too ready to preach to others on the importance of spending when he didn't do so. Something that I reminded him of in Dayton, he came to speak and we are allowed to ask questions, which he didn't want to answer. Now, Greece is not one of these countries. Greece, for a very particular security reason, has been spending, it's one of the high spenders, not as much as Poland now, but still above 3%. And the new 12-year procurement plan of Greek armed forces provide for almost 30 billion euros of additional spending in weaponry. We are in the process of modernizing our Air Force with the new modernized F-16s, with Rafale, and eventually with the purchase of 24 F-35s. By the end of the decade, and we are in the process of modernizing our Navy, which has been left very much behind with the purchase of 4 Belarus, 2 used but in very good condition Italian frigates, frames, and the modernization of another 4 existing MECO frigates for a total of 10, in addition to various other weapons that I don't want to go too much into detail. In all this, final point, the EU is helping. There was the big announcement by Ursula von der Leyen recently about the 5 targets, 5 policies of EU to help European countries to rearm. 1, not to account defense spending in the deficit and the debt, to reorient unspent amounts of money from RRF to defense, 150 billion euro safe fund for loans for defense in favorable conditions, and 650 billion euros of additional defense spending subsidized by the EU on a general European level. I think this shows that at last Europe, EU is taking things seriously. It's just a pity we don't have Britain together, but I think this crisis will bring Britain eventually closer to back closer to Europe. I only wish that the British government, the Labour government of Mr. Starmer, was more courageous and ready to move even much closer. But I understand that this has been a traumatic experience for everybody involved in Britain, and he is cautious. For me, overly cautious, but nevertheless, better this than before. Now, in regards to the Middle East, one cannot but be in awe with Israel, the Israeli government, and especially this Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has proven time and again that he is a political leader with capital P and L. Not only by taking this very risky decision, but very well planned military against Iran, and the successes, the military successes against Iran, which has never been weaker, but also the way that he has been able to play with Donald Trump and to drive him into something that originally he had denounced. He came to power by saying that this is now time for global peace and no more US interventions abroad. Now, and final point, no matter how great the military successes are, one cannot but wonder if there is a true political plan in place. We are good in military successes. We are very bad in what comes next. And we have proven time and again, Iraq is a case in mind, that we can defeat our adversaries, but then the troubles start. As we teach our students here at Pantheon, in Vietnam, there was no battle Americans did not win. They won all battles. For every American casualty, there were 30 and 40 and 50 Vietnamese casualties. But nevertheless, the war was lost by the Americans. Because if you don't have a strategy and if you don't have a political plan, especially in the murky waters of the Middle East, you get into trouble. So I don't know if it's going to be regime change or state destruction. I don't know what will happen with the centrifugal forces within Iran, which has a large Azeri, Kurdish, Arab minority. I don't know what comes next. I only wish that we have learned our lessons from all these failed interventions that we had in the past, and there is like a whole series of them that goes back to the 90s and more recent, but even further behind, and that at last there is a political plan for the Middle East. The Middle East cannot go from violence to violence. If we could resolve problems with violence, we would have resolved them long ago, because there is no other region in the world that has received so much violence and has been the theater of so many foreign interventions. So for all the Greek military officers and veterans who go on Greek TV in awe and bewilderment with the successes of Israelis, which are quite spectacular and amazing. One needs to be modest and understand history and the politics. The fact that the Shah's son, the son of the late Reza Pahlavi, already is circulating as a possible successor, shows you how little we have learned and how stupid we can be. Thank you.
Thank you. I think
they used to say, no, it's fine. They used to say, Churchill, not a simple person. Churchill used to say that there is no public opinion. There is only published opinion. If it is not published, it cannot become public opinion, right?
Thank you very much and see you very soon, I hope.